It would help if I had my stuff unmuted. It will never fail. Okay, okay. It is just shit. It's already gonna be 11:30. Jesus. Oh well. I don't work tomorrow, so I'm fine. I'm fine. Hold on. Let's see. Hold on. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. Is it? Yes. Okay. Yes. I'm not even gonna stay in this one scene. Anyways, hello. I am Viliana, your resident villainess, and it's something I've been wanting to do because I have a backlog of 7 books that I want to get through. I had more, but I went through them a couple of months ago. So, I just decided to read them on stream. Then, I didn't want to start it until I actually got a title. And hence, where this comes from. My Weaver's Reading Corner. And and I don't know if anybody, well, I don't think anybody could figure out from the title, but hold on, let's go somewhere better. There we go. Actually, let's see. Honestly, I really like this because it's how I kind of am right now. It's a bit big. God, this... Oh, gosh. see my hands. That's the sucky part. Because this is a cute concept. So I just stay like this. Or is there like a desk? Hold on, I think I saw a desk. I think I saw a desk. Hold on. I don't have a desk. Boo. Okay, I don't have a desk. That sucks. Oh well. I need to figure out some assets. Okay. I don't have my little text. Hold on. I thought I added it. Yes. There we go. Yeah, I need to get some like better at like more assets. Okay. Okay, I got it right here. Hi, Fall. Ooh. Okay. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Ah, hold on. Let me. Let's put some ambiance. Okay, that sounds actually much better. Okay, so, hello again. So, if anybody did not figure it out, one of the many books in my library is the Ring series. Now, I don't like horror movies, but I do love reading horror. And this is one of the series that I actually really wanted to read. I've had it for a while, so I started reading it, but I kind of stopped. So, so welcome to Weaver's Reading Corner, where I will be reading the books from my backlog. Now, I mainly have horror books, horror and murder mystery. I think some comedy. One comedy one I already finished reading, so yeah, I'm not gonna go back to it. I might, because I was annotating all my books at that point, so I'm not gonna annotate this one, but I don't know, maybe I might annotate this one, who knows. So anyways, The Ring by Koji Suzuki. Okay. Also, this is something I've been wanting to do because I don't really see anybody doing this a lot. So, it's just something a little bit for me. Alright. So, let's begin. Part 1. Autumn. September 5th, 1990, 10:49 p.m. Yokohama. A row of condominium buildings, each 14 stories high, ran along the southern edge of the housing development next to this. And I'm so sorry. I know I started reading, but I'm so sorry if I butcher some of these words. So sorry. Development next to the Sankayan Garden. I think I said that right. I'm sorry. Although built only recently, nearly all units were occupied. Nearly 100 dwellings were crammed into each building, but most of the inhabitants had never even seen the faces of their neighbors. Hi, Sora. The only proof that people lived here came at night, when windows lit up. Off to the south, the oily surface of the ocean reflected the glittering lights of a factory. A maze of pipes and conduits crawled along the factory walls like blood vessels on muscle tissue. Countless lights played over the front wall of the factory, like insects that glow in the dark. Even this grotesque scene had a certain type of beauty. Hey, that's fine. Please, make yourself comfortable. Also, am I coming through clearly? Okay, good. Good. Okay, anyways. Okay. The factory casts a wordless shadow on the black sea beyond. A few hundred meters closer, in the housing development, a single new two-story home stood among empty lots spaced at precise intervals. Its front doors opened directly onto the street, which ran north and south, and beside it was a one-car garage. The home was ordinary, like those found in any new housing development anywhere, but there were no other houses behind or beside it. Perhaps owing to the inconvenience to mass transit, Few of the lots had been sold, and for sale signs could be seen here and there all along the street. Compared to the condos, which were completed at about the same time and which were immediately snapped up by buyers, the housing development looked quite lonely. A beam of fluorescent light fell from the open window on the second floor of the house onto the dark surface of the street below. The light, the only one in the house, came from the room of Tomoko Oishi. Dressed in shorts and a white t-shirt, she was slouched in a chair reading a book for school. Her body was twisted into an impossible position, legs stretched out toward an electric fan on the floor. Fanning herself with the hem of her t-shirt to allow the breeze to hit her bare flesh, she muttered about the heat to no one in particular. A senior at a private girls' high school, she had let her homework pile up over a summer vacation. She had played too much and she blamed it on the heat. The summer, however, hadn't really been all that hot. There hadn't been many clear days, and she hadn't been able to spend nearly as much time at the beach as she did most summers. And what's more, as soon as vacation was over, there were 5 straight days of perfect summer weather. It irritated Tomoko. She resented the clear sky. How was she supposed to study in this stupid heat? With the hand she had been running through her hair, Tomoko reached over to turn up the volume of the radio. She saw a moth alight on the window screen beside her, then flew away somewhere, blown by the wind from the fan. The screen trembled slightly for a moment after the bug had vanished into the darkness. She had a test tomorrow, but she was getting nowhere. Tomoko Oishi wasn't going to be ready for it, even if she pulled an all-nighter. Honestly, I'm gonna probably go until this until this music is over. It's basically 2 hours. So we'll see how far we can get in 2 hours. She looked at the clock. Almost 11. She thought of watching the day's baseball wrap up on TV. Maybe she'd catch a glimpse of her parents in the infield seats. But Tomoko, who wanted in the worst way to get into college, was worried about the test. All she had to do was get into college. It didn't matter where, as long as it was a college. Even then, what an unfulfilling summer vacation had been. The foul weather had kept her from having any real fun, while the oppressive humidity had kept her from getting any work done. So hold on. Hold on. Oh no, my bookmark. It fell on my lap and I thought I lost it. Okay, I got it. Okay. Also, hello, whoever's coming in. I am reading. Well, first, I am Viliana, your local villainess, and I am reading The Ring. In my journey of getting through my backlog of many books. So, sit back and relax. Anyways, back to it. Alright. Even then, what an unfamiliar summer vacation it had been. The foul weather had kept her from having any real fun, while the oppressive humidity had kept her from getting any work done. I thought I read that. I'm sorry. Man, it was my last summer in high school. I wanted to go out with a bang, and now it's all over. The end. Her mind strayed to a meatier target than the weather to vent her bad mood on. And what's with mom and dad anyway, leaving their daughter all alone studying like this, covered in sweat, while they go gallivanting out to a baseball game? Why don't they think about my feelings for a change? Girl. Someone at work had unexpectedly given her father a pair of tickets to the Giants game, and so her parents had gone to Tokyo Dome. By now, it was almost time for them to be getting home, unless he'd gone out somewhere after the game. For the moment, Tomoko was home alone in their brand new house. It was strangely humid, considering that it hadn't rained in several days. In addition to the precipitation that oozed from her body, a dampness seemed to hang in the air. Tomoko unconsciously slapped at her thigh, but when she moved her hand away, she could find no trace of the mosquito. An itch began to develop just above her knee, but maybe it was just her imagination. She heard a buzzing sound. Tomoko waved her hands over her head. A fly. It flew suddenly upwards to escape the draft from the fan and disappeared from view. How had a fly gotten into the room? The door was closed. Girl, flies can get in no matter what. That is a fact. Tomoko checked the window screens, but nowhere could she find a hole big enough to admit a fly. She suddenly realized she was thirsty. She also needed to pee. Girl, flies. Exactly, flies, they're everywhere. She felt stifled. Not exactly like she was suffocating, but like there was a weight pressed down on her chest. For some time, Tomoko had been complaining to herself about how unfair life was. But now she was like a different person as she lapsed into silence. As she started down the stairs, her heart began to pound for no reason. Headlights from a passing car grazed across the wall at the foot of the stairs and slipped away. As the sound of the car's engine faded into the distance, the darkness in the house seemed to grow more intense. Tomoko intentionally made a lot of noise going down the stairs and turned on the light in the downstairs hall. Yeah, girl, that is me. She remained seated on the toilet, lost in thought for a long time, even after she had finished peeing. The violent beating of her heart still had not subsided. She never experienced anything like this before. What was going on? She took several deep breaths to steady herself, then stood up and pulled up her shorts and panties together. Why was there such need to... You know what? That's fine. You know what? That's fine. Keep treading. Mom and Dad, please get home soon, she said to herself, and suddenly sounding very girlish. Ew, gross. Who am I talking to? It wasn't like she was addressing her parents, asking them to come home. She was asking someone else. Hey, stop scaring me. Please? Before she knew it, she was even asking politely. Hi, Calamity. Yes, I'm finally getting to my reading stream. She washed her hands at the kitchen sink. Without drying them, she took some ice cubes from the freezer, dropped them in a glass, and filled it with Coke. She drained the glass in a single gulp and set it on the counter. The ice cubes swirled in the glass for a moment, then settled. Tomoko shivered. She felt cold. Her throat was still dry. She took the big bottle of Coke from the refrigerator and refilled her glass. Her hands were shaking now. She had a feeling there was something behind her. Something. Definitely not a person. The sour stench of rotting flesh melted into the air around her, enveloping her. It couldn't be anything corporeal. Corporeal? Is that how you say it? We'll go with corporeal for now. I think that's how you say it. Stop it, please, she begged, speaking aloud now. The 15-watt fluorescent bulb over the kitchen sink flickered on and off like ragged breathing. It had to be new, but its light seemed pretty unreliable right now. Suddenly, Tomoko wished she had hit the switch that turned on all the lights in the kitchen, but she couldn't walk over to where the switch was. She couldn't even turn around. She knew what was behind her. A Japanese-style room of 8 tatami mats with the Buddhist altar dedicated to her grandfather's memory in the alcove. Through the slightly open curtains, she'd be able to see the grass and the empty lots and thin strips of light from the condos beyond. There shouldn't be anything else. By the time she had drunk half the second glass of cola, Tomoko couldn't move at all. The feeling was too intense. She couldn't just be imagining the presence. She was sure that something was reaching out even now to touch her on the neck. I almost said back. What if it's... She didn't want to think of the rest. If she went on like that, she'd remember, and she didn't think she could stand the terror. It had happened a week ago, so long ago she'd forgotten. It was all Shuichi's fault. He shouldn't have said that. Later, none of them could stop. But then they'd come back to the city, and those scenes, those vivid images, hadn't seemed quite as believable. The whole thing had been someone's ideas of a joke. Tomoko tried to think about something more cheerful. Anything besides that. But if that had been real, after all, the phone did ring, didn't it? Oh, Mom and Dad, what are you doing? What are you doing? Come home, Tomoko cried aloud. But even after she spoke, the eerie shadow showed no signs of dissipating. It was behind her, keeping still, watching, and waiting. Waiting for its chance to arrive. At 17, Tomoko didn't know what true terror was. But she did know that there were fears that grew in the imagination of their own accord. That must be it. Yeah, that's all it is. When I turn around, there won't be anything there. Nothing at all. Tomoko was seized by a desire to turn around. She wanted to confirm that there was nothing there and get herself out of the situation. But was that really all there was to it? An evil chill seemed to rise up around her shoulders, spread to her back, and began to slither down her spine, lower and lower. Her t-shirt was soaked with cold sweat. Her physical responses were too strong for it to be just her imagination. Didn't someone say your body is more honest than your mind? Yet another voice spoke too. Turn around. There shouldn't be anything there. If you don't finish your Coke and get back to your studies, there's no telling what you'll do on the test tomorrow. In the glass, an ice cube cracked, as if spurred by the second without stopping to think. Tomoko spun around. September 5th, 10:54 p.m. Tokyo. The intersection in front of Shinagawa Station. Also, hello to whoever's coming in. I am your resident villainess, Viliana, and I am reading The Ring as part of getting through my backlog of books. The light turned yellow right in front of him. He could have darted through, but instead, Kimura pulled his cab over to the curb. He was hoping to... That's a good... Hold on, I counted them yesterday. 1 second. I think it's 7. I think it's 7 in total that I have. And hold on, let's see. Yeah, it's not too bad. But the Ring has 3 books. And then another series has 2. And then okay. But it's yeah, I do want I've been sitting on these books for, well, no, hold on. I've been sitting on the Ring for a bit, and then I finally got the other 2. Then I got like quite a other few, like, because I got a gift card for my birthday. Okay, so anyways, back to it. Maybe eventually, maybe when I get through those 7 books, I might get some more. I don't know. Okay. 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 So Kimuro pulled his cab over. Okay, cool. He was hoping to pick up a fare headed to Roppongi's crossing. A lot of customers he picked up here were bound for Akasaka or Roppongi, and it wasn't uncommon for people to jump in while he was stopped at a light like this. A motorcycle nosed up between Kimuro's taxi and the curb and came to a stop at the edge of the crosswalk. The rider was a young man dressed in jeans. Kimura got annoyed by motorcycles, the way they wove and darted their way through the traffic like this. He especially hated it when he was waiting at a light and a bike came up and stopped right at his door, blocking it. And today, he had been hassled by customers all day long and was in a foul mood. Kimura cast a sour look at the biker. His face was hidden by his helmet visor. One leg rested on the curb of the sidewalk. His knees were spread wide, and he rocked his body back and forth in a thorough slovenly manner. A young lady with nice legs walked by on the sidewalk. The biker turned his head to watch her go by, but his gaze didn't follow her the whole way. His head had swiveled about 90 degrees when he seemed to fix his gaze on the show window behind her. The woman walked on out of his field of vision. The biker was left behind, staring intently at something. I'm sorry, Fa. You could get the next one. The walk light began to flash and then went out. Pedestrians caught in the middle of the street began to hurry, crossing right in front of the taxi. Nobody raised a hand or headed for his cab. Kimura revved the engine and waited for the light to turn green. Just then, the biker seemed to be seized by a great spasm. Raising both arms and collapsing against Kimura's taxi. He fell against the door of the cab with a loud thump and disappeared from view. You asshole. The kid must have lost his balance and fallen over. Though Kimura, as he turned on his blinkers and got out of the car, if the door was damaged, he intended to make the kid pay for repairs. The light turned green and the car behind Kimura began to pass by into the intersection. The biker was lying face up on the street, thrashing his legs and struggling with both hands to remove his helmet. Before checking out the kid, though, Kimura first looked at his meal ticket. Just as he had expected, there was a long, angling crease in the door panel. Shit! Kimura clicked his tongue in disgust as he approached the fallen man. Despite the fact that the strap was still securely fastened under his chin, the guy was desperately trying to remove his helmet. He seemed ready to rip off his own head off in the process. Does it hurt that bad? Kimura realized now that something was seriously wrong with the rider. He finally squatted down next to him and asked, "You all right?" Because of the tinted visor, he couldn't make out the man's expression. The biker clutched at Kimura's hand and seemed to be begging for something. He was almost clinging to Kimura. He said nothing. He didn't even raise the visor. Kimura jumped to action. "Hold on, I'll call an ambulance." Running to a public phone, Kimura puzzled over how a simple fall from the standing position could have turned into this. He must have hit his head just right. But don't be stupid. That idiot was wearing a helmet, right? He doesn't look like he broke an arm or a leg. I hope this doesn't turn into a pain in the ass. It wouldn't be too good for me if he hurt himself running into my car. Valid. Kimura had a bad feeling about this. So if he really is hurt, does it come out of my insurance? That means an accident report, which means the cops. Uh-oh. When he hung up and went back, the man was lying unmoving with his hands clutching his throat. Several passers-by had stopped and were looking on with concerned expressions. Kimura pushed his way through the people, making sure everybody knew it had been he who had called the ambulance. Hey, hang in there. The ambulance is on its way. Kimura unfastened the chin strap of the helmet. It came right off. Kimura couldn't believe how the guy had been struggling with it earlier. The man's face was amazingly distorted. The only word that could describe his expression was astonishment. Both eyes were wide open and staring at his bright red tongue was stuck in the back of his throat, blocking it, while saliva drooled from the corner of his mouth. The ambulance would be arriving too late. When his hand had touched the kid's throat in removing his helmet, he hadn't felt a pulse. Kimura shuddered. The scene was losing reality. One wheel of the fallen motorcycle still spun slowly, and oil leaked from the engine. Pulling in the street and running into the sewer, there was no breeze. The night sky was clear, while directly over their heads the stoplight turned red again. Kimura rose shakily to his feet, clutching at the guardrail that ran along the sidewalk. From there, he looked once more at the man lying in the street. The man's head, pillowed on his helmet, was bent at nearly a right angle. An unnatural posture, no matter how you looked at it. Did I put it there? Did I put his head in his helmet like that? Like a pillow? For what? He couldn't recall the past several seconds. Those wide open eyes were looking at him. A sinister chill swept over him. Lukewarm air seemed to pass right over his shoulders. It was a tropical evening, but Kimura found himself shivering uncontrollably. One second. Okay. Chapter 2. Okay, anyways. Okay, the early morning light of autumn reflected off the screen surface of the inner moat of the Imperial Palace. September's stifling heat was finally fading. kind of eating too because I haven't eaten all day. No, that's a lie. I ate lunch and then we went to like a ramen place today. So I did eat. But then I took a nap. Okay. Kazuyuki Asakawa was halfway down to the subway platform, but suddenly had a change of heart. He wanted a closer look at the water he'd been looking at from the 9th floor. It felt like the filthy air of the editorial offices had filtered down here to the basement levels like dregs settling to the bottom of a bottle. He wanted to breathe outside air. He climbed the stairs to the street. With the green of the palace grounds in front of him, the exhaust fumes generated from the confluence of the number 5 expressway and the ring road didn't seem so noxious. The brightening sky shone in the cool of the morning. Asakawa was physically fatigued from having pulled an all-nighter, but he wasn't especially sleepy. The fact that he completed his article stimulated him and kept his brain cells active. He hadn't taken a day off for 2 weeks and planned to spend today and tomorrow at home, resting up. He was just going to take it easy on orders from the editor-in-chief. He saw an empty taxi coming from the direction of Kuranshita, and he instinctively raised his hand. 2 days ago, a subway commuter pass from Takebashi to Shinbaba had expired, and he hadn't bought a new one yet. It cost 400 yen to get to his condominium in Kita Shinagawa from here by subway. Well, it cost nearly 2,000 yen to go by cab. He hated to waste over 1,500 yen, but when he thought of the 3 transfers he'd have to make on the subway and the fact that he'd just gotten paid, he decided he could splurge just this once. Asakawa's decision to take a taxi on this day and at this spot was nothing more than a whim, the outcome of a series of innocuous impulses. A lot of words. It's a big word for Elmo. He hadn't emerged from the subway with the intention of hailing a cab. He'd been seduced by the outside air at the very moment that a taxi had approached with its red vacant lamp lit. And in an instant, the thought of buying a ticket and transferring through 3 separate stations seemed like more effort than he could stand. If he had taken the subway home, however, a certain pair of incidents would almost certainly never have been connected. Of course, a story always begins with such coincidences. The taxi pulled to a hesitant stop in front of the Palisade building. The driver was a small man of about 40, and it looked like he too had been he had been up all night. His eyes were so red. There was a colored mugshot on the dashboard with the driver's name, Mikio Kimura, written beside it. Kita Shinagawa, please. Hearing the destination, Kimura felt like doing a little dance. Kita Shinagawa was just past his company's garage in Higashi Gotanda. Pretty sure I'm saying that right, but you know. And since it was the end of his shift, he was planning to go in the direction anyways. Moments like this, when he guessed right and things went his way, reminded him that he liked driving a cab. Suddenly, he felt like talking. You covering a story? His eyes bloodshot with fatigue, Asakawa was looking out the window and letting his mind drift when the driver asked this. Okay. Almost lost my place. Barely 14 pages in. Eh? He replied, suddenly alert, wondering how the cabbie knew his profession. You're a reporter, right? For our newspaper? Yeah, their weekly magazine, actually, but how did you know? Kimura had been driving a taxi for nearly 20 years, and he could pretty much guess a fare's occupation depending on where he picked him up, what he was wearing, and how he talked. If the person had a glamorous job and was proud of it, he was always ready to talk about it. It must be hard having to be at work this early in the morning. No, just the opposite. I'm on my way home to sleep. Well, you're just like me then. Asakawa usually didn't feel much pride in his work, but this morning he had feeling the same satisfaction he'd felt the first time he'd seen an article in his news. He'd seen an article of his appear in print. I can't fucking read. He'd finally finished a series he'd been working on, and it had drawn quite a reaction. Is your work interesting? Yeah, I guess so, said Asakawa, non-committally. Sometimes it was interesting and sometimes it wasn't, but right now, he couldn't be bothered to go into it in detail. He still hadn't forgotten his disastrous failure of 2 years ago. He could still clearly remember the title of the article he'd been working on. The New Gods of Modernity. Modernity. Yeah, we'll just go with that. In his mind's eye, he could still picture the wretched figure he had cut as he stood quaking before the editor-in-chief to tell him that he couldn't go on as a reporter. For a while, there was silence in the taxi. He took the curve just left of Tokyo Tower at a considerable speed. Excuse me, said Kimura. Should I take the canal road or the number 1 Kaihen? One route or the other would be more convenient depending on where they were going in Kitashitagawa. Take the expressway. Let me out just before Shinbaba. Taxi driver can relax a bit once he knows precisely where his fare is going. Kimura turned right Efura no Tsuji. Bear with me. They were approaching it now, the intersection Kimura had been unable to put out of his mind for the past month. Unlike Asakawa, who had been haunted by his failure, Kimura was able to look back at the accident fairly objectively. After all, he hadn't been responsible for the accident, so he hadn't had to do any soul-searching because of it. It was entirely the other guy's fault, and no amount of caution over Kimura's part could have warded it off. He had completely overcome the terror he had felt. A month. Was that a long time? Asakawa was still enthralled of the terror he'd known 2 years ago. Still, Kimura couldn't explain why every time he passed this place, he felt compelled to tell people about what had happened. If Kimura glanced in his rearview mirror and saw that his face was sleeping, then he would give up. But if not, then he'd tell every passenger without exception everything that occurred. It was a compulsion. Every time he'd go through the intersection, he was overcome by a compulsion to talk about it. The damnedest thing happened right here about a month ago. As though it had been waiting for Kimura to begin his story, the light of the intersection changed from yellow to red. You know, a lot of strange things happen in this world. Kimura tried to catch his passenger's interest by hinting in this. Way at the nature of his story. Asakawa had been half asleep, but now he lifted his head suddenly and looked around him frantically. He had been startled awake by the sound of Kimura's voice and was now trying to figure out where they were. Is sudden death on the increase these days? Among young people, I mean? The phrase resonated in Asakawa's ears. Sudden death. Kimura continued. Well, it's just that, I guess it was about a month ago. I'm right over there, sitting in my cab, waiting for the light to change, and suddenly this motorbike just falls over on me. It wasn't like he was moving and took a spill. He was standing still, and suddenly, wham! And what do you think happened next? Oh, the driver, he was a prep school kid. 19 years old. He died. That is the idiot. Damn. Because imagine being called an idiot and you fucking die. Surprised the hell out of me, I can tell you that. So there's an ambulance and the cops and then my cab. He banged into it, see. Quite a scene, I tell ya. Asakawa was listening silently, but as a 10-year veteran reporter, he developed an intuition about things like this. With instinctive, reflexive quickness, he made note of the driver's name and the name of the cab company. The way he died was a little weird, too. He was desperately trying to pull off his helmet. Just trying to rip it off, lying on his back and thrashing around. I went to call the ambulance, and by the time I got back, he was stiff. Where did you say that happened? Asakawa had fully awake now. Right over there. See? Kimura pointed to the crosswalk in front of the station. Shinagawa Station was located in the Takenawa area of Minato Ward. Asakawa burned this fact into his memory. An accident there would have fallen under the jurisdiction of the Takanawa precinct. In his mind, he quickly worked out which of his contacts would give him access to the Takanawa police station. This was when it was nice to work for a major newspaper. They had connections everywhere, and sometimes their ability to gather information was better than the police bureaus. That is honestly true. Oddly enough. So they called it sudden death? He wasn't sure if this was a proper medical term. He asked in a hurry now, not even realizing why this accident was striking such a chord with him. It's ridiculous, right? My cab was totally stopped. He just went and fell on it. It was all him. But I had to file an accident report, and I came this close to having it show up on my insurance record. I tell you, it was a total disaster out of the blue. Fair enough. Why didn't it go, though? Hold on. Hello? What? Why is it not going? No, it shouldn't be. That's the thing. Like, I'm logged in and everything. Hold up. What? Hold on. Let's see if it works here.
What? Did we just become best friends? Yup.
What? Okay. Oops. Wait. Okay, hold on. I now know why. Hold on. There we go. Oh, she is big. Let's move her over here. Okay, so what is this? Okay, getting rid of that one. Okay. Pretty sure I probably could get through this book faster if I just read and did not interact, but then again, I would not want to. Okay, here we go. Found my place. Here. Do you remember exactly what day and time this all happened? You spell the story. September, let me see, 14th or 15th must have been. Time was around 11 at night, I think. As soon as he said this, Kimoto had a flashback. The muggy air, the pitch black oil leaking from the fallen bike. The oil looked like a living thing as it crept towards the sewer. Headlamps reflected off its surface as it formed, vicious droplets and soundlessly oozed into the street drain. The moment when it had seemed like his sensory apparatus had failed him, and then the shocked face of the dead man had pillowed on his helmet. What had been so astonishing anyway? The light turned green. Kimoto stepped on the gas. From the back seat came the sound of a ballpoint pen on paper. Asakawa was making notes. Kimoto felt nauseated. Why was he recalling it so vividly? He swallowed the bitter bile that had been welled up. and fought off the nausea. Now, what do you think was the cause of death was? Asked Asakawa. Heart attack. Heart attack? Was that really the coroner's diagnosis? He didn't think they used the term anymore. I'll have to verify that, along with the date and time, murmured Asakawa as he continued to make notes. In other words, there was absolutely no external injuries? Yeah, that's right. Absolutely none. It was just a shock. I mean, I'm the one who ought to be shocked, right? Eh? Well, I mean, the stiff. He had this look of complete shock on his face. Asakawa felt something click in his mind. At the same time, a voice in him denied any connection between the two incidents. Just a coincidence. That's all. Shinbaba Station on the Keihin Kyoku light rail line loomed up in front of them. At the next light, turn left and stop there, please. The taxi stopped and the door opened. Asakawa handed over 2,000 yen notes along with one of his business cards. My name's Asakawa. I'm with the Daily News Company. If it's all right with you, I'd like to hear about this in more detail later. Okay by me, said Kimura, sounding pleased. For some reason, he felt like that was his mission. I'll call you tomorrow or the day after. Do you want my number? Never mind. I wrote down the name of your company. I see it's not far away. Asakawa got out of the taxi and was about to close the door when he hesitated for a moment. He felt an unnameable dread at the thought of confirming what he just heard. Maybe I'd better not stick my nose into anything funny. It could be just replay of the last time. But now that his interest had been aroused, he couldn't just walk away. He knew that all too well. He asked Kimura one last time. The guy. He was struggling in pain, trying to get his helmet off. Right? Chapter 3. Oh. Well, I don't know. I'll probably stop at the 2-hour mark. Okay. Oguri, his editor, scowled as he listened to Asakawa's report. Suddenly he was remembering what Asakawa had been like 2 years ago. He labored at a biography of the guru Shoko Kageyama, incorporating all his research and more. Something wasn't right about him then. So bedeviled was he that Oguri had even tried to get him to see a shrink. Part of the problem was that it had been right then. 2 years ago, the whole publishing industry had been caught up in an unprecedented occult boom. Photos of ghosts had swamped the editorial offices. Every publisher in the country had been deluged with accounts and photographs of supernatural experiences. Every one of them a hoax. Hold on, I'm eating. I'm also snacking right now too, because I'm sorry if you hear my wrapper. I swear, these wafers are like those hidden... Is it Nature Valley? Yeah, Hidden Valley's the ranch. Yeah, the Nature Valley granola bars. Just crumbs everywhere. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, okay. Oguri had wondered what the world was coming to. He had figured they had a pretty good handle on the way the world worked, but he just couldn't think of a convincing explanation for that kind of thing. It was utterly preposterous. The number of contributors that had crawled out of the woodwork. It was no exaggeration to say that the office had been buried daily by mail. Every package dealt with the occult in some way. And it wasn't just the Daily News Company that was the target of this outpouring. Every publisher in Japan, worthy of the name, had been swept up in the incomprehensible phenomenon. Sighing over the time they were wasting, they'd made a rough survey of the claims. What is that? Okay. Most of the submissions were, predictably, anonymous. But it was concluded that there was no one out there who was sending out multiple manuscripts under assumed names. At a rough estimate, this meant that about 10 million different individuals had sent letters to one publisher or another. Damn, that's a lot. It's been a while since I read this, so I never finished this book. So 10 million people. The figure was staggering. The stories themselves weren't nearly as terrifying as the fact that there were so many of them. In effect, 1 out of 10 people in the country had sent something in. Yet not a single person in the industry, nor their families and friends, was counted among the informants. What was going on? Where were the heaps of mail coming from? Editors everywhere scratched their heads, and then, before anyone could figure it out, the wave began to recede. The strange phenomenon went on for about 6 months, and then, as it had all been a dream, editorial rooms had returned to normal, and they no longer received any submissions of that nature. It had been Oguri's responsibility to determine how the weekly of a major newspaper publisher should react to all this. The conclusion he came to was that they should ignore it scrumptiously. Oguri strongly suspected that the spark which had set off the whole thing had come from a class of magazines he routinely referred to as the rags. By running readers' photos and tales, they stoked the public's fever for this sort of thing and created a monstrous state of affairs. Of course, Oguri knew that this couldn't quite explain it all away, but he had to approach the situation with logic of some sort. Eventually, the editorial staff of Oguri on down had taken to hauling all this mail unopened to the incinerator. And they dealt with the world just the way they had, as if nothing untoward were happening. They maintained a strict policy of not printing anything on the occult. Turning a deaf ear to the anonymous sources, whether or not that did the trick, the unprecedented tide of submissions began to ebb. And of all times, it was then that Asakawa had foolishly, recklessly run around pouring oil on the dying flames. Oguri fixed Asakawa with a dour gaze. Was he going to make the same mistake twice? Now listen, you. Whenever Oguri couldn't figure out what to say, he started out like this. Now listen, you. I know what you're thinking, sir. Now, I'm not saying it's not interesting. We don't know what will jump out at us. But look. If what jumps out at us looks anything like it did that other time, I won't like it very much. Valid. Last time, Oguri still believed that the occult boom 2 years ago had been engineered. He hated the occult for all he'd gone through on account of it, and his bias was alive and kicking after 2 years. I'm not trying to suggest anything mystical here. All I'm saying is that it couldn't have been coincidence. A coincidence. Oguri cupped a hand to his ear and once again tried to sort out the story. Asakawa's wife's niece, Tomoko Oishi, had died at her home in Honmoku at around 11 p.m. on the 15th of September. The cause of death was sudden heart failure. She was a high school senior, only 17. On the same day, at the same time, a 19-year-old prep school student on a motorcycle had died, also of a cardiac infarction, while waiting for a light in front of Shinagawa Station. It sounds to me like nothing but coincidence. You hear about the accident from your cab driver, and you remember your wife's niece. Nothing more than that, right? On the contrary, Asakawa stated, and paused for effect. Then he said, the kid on the motorcycle, at the moment he died, was struggling to pull off his helmet. So? Tomoko, too, when her body was discovered, she seemed to have been tearing at her head. Her fingers were tightly entwined in her own hair. Asakawa had met Tomoko on several occasions. Like any high school girl, she had paid a lot of attention to her hair, shampooing it every day, that sort of thing. Why would a girl like that be tearing out her precious hair? He didn't know the true nature of whatever it was that had made her do that, but every time Asakawa thought of her pulling desperately at her hair, he imagined some sort of invisible thing to go along with the indescribable horror she must have felt. I don't know. Now listen, you. Are you sure you're not coming at this with preconceptions? If you took any two incidents, you could find things in common if you looked hard enough. You're saying they both died of a heart attack, so they must have been in a lot of pain. So she's pulling at her hair, he's struggling with his helmet. It actually sounds pretty normal to me. Well, he had to recognize that this was a possibility. Asakawa shook his head. He wasn't going to be defeated so easily. But sir, then it would be the chest that hurt. Why would they be tearing at their heads? Now listen, you. Have you ever heard of a heart attack? Have you ever had a heart attack? Well, no. And have you asked the doctor about it? About what? About whether or not a person having a heart attack would tear at his head. Asakawa fell silent. He had, in fact, asked the doctor. The doctor had replied, I couldn't rule it out. It was a wishy-washy answer. After all, the opposite sometimes happens. Sometimes when a person experiences a cerebral hemorrhage, or bleeding in the cerebral membrane, they feel stomach discomfort at the same time as a headache. Whoa. So it depends on the individual. When there's a tough math problem, some people scratch their heads, some people smoke, some people even rub their bellies. Oguri swiveled in his chair as he said this. The point is, we can't say anything at this stage, can we? We don't have space for that stuff. You know, because of what happened 2 years ago. We won't touch this kind of thing, not lightly. If you felt fine about speculating it in print, then we could, of course. Maybe so. Maybe it was just like his editor asked.
It was just a freak coincidence. But still, in the end, the doctor had just shaken his head. He'd pressed the doctor, do heart attack victims really pull out their own hair? And the doctor had just frowned and said, His look said it all. None of the patients he'd seen had acted like that. Yes, sir, I understand. At the moment, there was nothing to do but retreat meekly. If he couldn't discover a more objective connection between the two incidents, it would be difficult to convince his editor. Asakawa promised himself that if he couldn't dig up anything, he'd just shut up and leave it alone.
Chapter 4.
Asakawa hung up the phone and stayed there like that for a while, motionless, his hand still on the receiver, the sound of his own unnecessarily excited voice, hanging on the other person's reaction, still echoed in his ears. He had a feeling he wasn't going to be able to do this. The person on the other end had taken the phone from his secretary with a subtly pompous tone, but as he listened to Asakawa's proposal, the tone of the voice had softened somewhat. At first, he probably thought Asakawa was calling about advertising. Then he'd done some quick calculating and realized the potential profit in having an article written profiling him. The Top Interview series had begun running in September. The idea was to spotlight a CEO who had built up his company on his own, focusing on the obstacles he'd overcome and how. Considering that he'd actually succeeded in getting an appointment to do the interview, Asakawa should have been able to hang up the phone with a little more satisfaction. But something weighed on him. All he'd hear from the Philistine were the same old corporate war stories, boasts about what a genius he was, how he'd seized opportunities and clawed his way to the top. If Asakawa didn't thank him and stand up to leave, the tales of valor would go on forever. He was sick of it. He detested whoever had come up with this project. He knew all too well that the magazine had to sell ad space to survive. And it was that kind of article laid the necessary groundwork for that. But Asakawa himself didn't much care if the company had money or lost it. All that mattered to him was whether or not the work was engaging. No matter how easy a job was physically, if it didn't involve any imagination, it was usually ended up exhausting you. Asakawa headed for the archives on the 4th floor. He needed to do some background reading for the interview tomorrow, but more than that, there was something that was bothering him. The idea of an objective, causal? Pretty sure it's causal? Causal relationship between those two incidents fascinated him. And then he remembered. He didn't even know how to begin, but a certain question had come to him. In a furtive moment that his mind had rested free of the voice of the Philistine. Were these two inexplicable sudden deaths indeed the only ones that occurred at 11 p.m. on September 5th? If not, that's it. Wait a minute. I said 14th or 15th. It was the 4th or the 5th. Rip to me and my reading skills. It's me learning how to read. This is my stream. Learning how to read again. Okay. If not, that's it. There had been other similar incidents. Then the chances of them being a coincidence were practically nil. Asakawa decided to take a look at the newspapers from early September. Part of his job was reading the newspaper meticulously, but in his case, he usually read only the headlines in the local news section. So there was more than just a chance that there was something he'd missed. He had a feeling there had been. He had the feeling that about a month ago, in the corner of the page in the local news section, he'd seen an odd headline. It had been a small article on the lower left-hand page. All he remembered was where it had appeared. He remembered reading the headline and thinking, "Hey!" But then someone from the desk had called to him, and he'd gotten distracted by work, and that he never actually read the article. With the buoyance of a child on a treasure hunt, Asakawa began his search in the morning edition from September 6th. He was certain he'd find a clue. Reading month-old newspapers in the gloomy archives was giving him a sort of psychological uplift he never got from interviewing a Philistine. Asakawa was much more cut out for this kind of thing than for running around on the beat dealing with people of all sorts. The September 7th evening edition, that's where the article was, in just the position he'd remembered it being. Squeezed into a corner of the news of a shipwreck that had claimed 34 lives, the article took up even less space than he'd recalled. No wonder he had overlooked it. Asakawa took off his silver-rimmed glasses, buried his face in the newspaper, and pored over the article. Young couple dead of unnatural causes in rental car.
Bum, bum, bum.
At 6:15 a.m. on the 7th, a young man and woman were found dead in the front seats of a car on a vacant lot in Ashina, Yokosuka, along a prefectural road. The bodies were discovered by a truck driver who happened to pass by and who had then reported the case to the Yokosuka police precinct. From the car registration, they were identified as a preparatory school student from Shibuya, Tokyo, age 19, and a private girls' high school student from Isogo, Yokohama, age 17. The car had been rented from the agency in Shibuya 2 evenings previously by the preparatory school student. At the time of discovery, the car was locked with the key in the ignition. The estimated time of death was sometime between the night of the 5th and the pre-dawn hours of the 6th. Since the windows were rolled up, it was thought that the couple fell asleep and asphyxiated. But the possibility that they had taken an overdose of drugs in order to commit a love suicide had not been ruled out. The exact cause of death had not been determined. As of yet, there is no suspicion of homicide. This was all there was to the article. But Asakawa felt like he'd gotten a bite. First of all, the girl who died was 17 and attended a private girls' school in Yokohama, just like his niece Tomoko. The guy who rented the car was 19 and a prep school student, just like the kid who died in front of Shinagawa Station. The estimated time of death was virtually identical. Cause of death unknown too. There had been some connection among these 4 deaths. It couldn't take long to establish the definitive commonalities. After all, Asakawa was in the inside of a major news-gathering organization. He wasn't lacking for sources of information. He made a copy of the article and handed it back to the editorial office. He felt like he just struck gold, and the pace quickened of its own accord. He could barely wait for the elevator. Yokosuka City Hall Press Club. Yoshino was sitting at his desk, his pen scurrying across a sheet of manuscript paper. As long as the expressway wasn't crowded, you could make it here from the main office in Tokyo in an hour. Asakawa came up from behind Yoshino and called his name. Hey, Yoshino. He hadn't seen Yoshino in a year and a half. Huh? Hey, Asakawa. What brings you down to Yokosuka? Here, have a seat. Yoshino pulled up a chair towards the desk and urged Asakawa to sit. Yoshino hadn't shaved and had given him a seedy look, but he could be surprisingly considerate towards others. You keeping busy? You could say that. Yoshino and Asakawa had known each other when Asakawa was still in the local news department, which Yoshino had entered 3 years ahead of him. Yoshino was 35 now. I called the Yokosuka office. That's how I learned you were here. Why, you need me for something? Asakawa handed him the copy he'd made of the article. Yoshino stared at it for extraordinarily long time. Since he'd written the article himself, he should have been able to remember what it said just by looking at it. As it was, he sat there concentrating all his nerves on it, hand frozen halfway through the motion of putting a peanut in his mouth. It was as if he were chewing it, recalling what he'd written and digesting it. What about it? Yoshino had assumed a serious expression. Nothing special. I just wanted to find out more details. Yoshino stood up. Alright, let's go next door and talk over a cup of tea or something. Do you have time for this right now? Are you sure I'm not interrupting? Not a problem. This is more interesting than what I was doing. There was a little cafe right next to City Hall where you could get coffee for 200 yen a cup. Yoshino sat down and immediately turned the counter and called out, 2 coffees. Then turning back to Asakawa, he hunched over, leaning close. Okay. Look. I've been on the local beat for 12 years now. I've seen a lot of things, but never have I come across anything as downright odd as this. Yoshino paused for a sip of water, then continued. Now, Asakawa, this has got to be a fair trade of information. Why is someone from the main office looking into this? Asakawa wasn't ready to tip his hand. He wanted to keep the scoop for himself. If an expert like Yoshino caught wind of it in a heartbeat, he'd chase and nab the prize for himself. Asakawa promptly came up with a lie. No special reason. My niece was a friend of the dead girl, and she keeps badgering me for information. You know about the incident, so as long as I was down here. It was a poor lie. He thought he saw Yoshino's eyes flash with suspicion, and he shrank back unnerved. Really? Yeah. Well, she's a high school student, right? It's bad enough that her friend's dead, but then there's the circumstances. She just keeps bugging me about it. I'm begging you. Give me details. So what do you want to know? Did they ever decide on the cause of death? Yoshino shook his head. Basically, they're saying their hearts just stopped all of a sudden. They have no idea why. How about the murder angle? Strangulation, for example? Impossible. No bruise marks on the neck. Drugs? No traces in the autopsy. In other words, the case hasn't been solved. Shit, no. No solving to be done. It isn't a murder. It's not even an incident, really. They died of some illness. Or from some kind of accident. That's all there is to it. Period. There's not even an investigation. It was a blunt way of putting it. Yoshino leaned back in his chair. So why haven't they released the names of the deceased? They're minors. Plus, there's a suspicion that it was a love suicide. At this point, Yoshino suddenly smiled, as if he just remembered something, and he leaned forward again. You know, the guy? He had his jeans and his briefs down around his knees. The girl, too. Her panties were pulled down to her knees. So you mean it was a coitus interruptus? I didn't say they were doing it. They were just getting ready to do it. They were just getting ready to have a little fun, and bam! That's when it happened. Yoshino clapped his hands together for effect. Yeah, I know. Okay. What happened? Okay, Asakawa, level with me. You've got something. I mean, something that connects with this case, right? Asakawa didn't reply. I can keep a secret. I won't steal your scoop either. It's just that I'm interested in this. Asakawa still remained silent. And are you going to keep me hanging here in suspense? Should I tell? But I can't. I mustn't say anything yet. But lies aren't working. Sorry, Yoshino. Could you wait a little longer? I can't tell you quite yet, but I will in like 2 or 3 days. I promise. Disappointment clouded Yoshino's face. If you say so, pal. Asakawa gave him a pleading look, urging him to continue his story. Well, we've got to assume that something happened. A guy and a gal suffocate just when they're getting ready to do it. That's not even funny. I guess it's possible that they'd taken poison earlier, if it had only taken effect just then. But there was no traces. Sure, there are poisons that leave no trace, but you can't figure on a couple of students getting their hands on something like that. Yoshino thought of the place where the car had been found. He'd actually gone there himself and still had a clear impression. The car was parked on an overgrown piece of vacant land in a little ravine just off the unpaved prefectural road that led Ashina to Mount Okusu. Cars coming up the road could just catch the reflection of its taillights as they passed. It wasn't hard to imagine why the prep school kids who'd been driving had chosen this place to park it. After nightfall, hardly any cars used this road, and with the thick growth of trees providing cover, it made for the perfect hideaway for penniless young people. For a penniless young couple, not young people. Same thing. wow, it's only going to be 2 hours. Wow. Okay. Then you've got the guy with his head jammed up against the steering wheel and the side window. Meanwhile, the girl's got her head buried between the passenger seat and the door. That's how they died. I saw them being taken out of the car with my own eyes. Each body came tumbling out the moment the doors were opened. It's like at the moment of death, some sort of force had been pushing them from the inside. They didn't stop when they died, but kept pushing for 30 hours or so until the investigators opened the door and then burst out. Now, are you with me here? This car was a two-door. One of those where you can't lock the doors with the key still inside, and the key was in the ignition. But the doors, well, you catch my drift. The car was completely sealed. It's hard to imagine that any force from the outside could have affected them. What kind of expression do you suppose they had on their dead faces? They were both scared shitless, faces contorted with terror. Yoshino paused to catch his breath. There was a loud gulping sound. It wasn't clear which of them had swallowed his saliva. Think about it. Suppose, just for the hell of it, that some fearsome beast had come out of the woods. They'd have been scared, and they would have huddled close to each other. Even if he hadn't, the girl would have absolutely clung to him. After all, they were lovers, but instead, their backs were pressed up against the doors, as if they were trying to get as far away from each other as they could. Yoshino threw up his hands in a gesture of surrender. Beats the hell out of me. If it hadn't been for the shipwreck in the waters of Yokosuka, the article might have been given more space. And if it had, there would have been a lot of readers who would have enjoyed trying to solve the puzzle, playing detective. But a consensus had spread, an atmosphere among the investigators and everybody else who had been at the scene. They all thought more or less the same thing, and all of them were on the verge of blurting it out, but nobody actually did. That kind of consensus. Even though it was completely impossible for two young people to die of heart attacks at exactly the same moment, even though none of them really believed it, everybody told themselves the medical lie that it had to happen just like that. It wasn't that people refrained from saying anything out of fear of being laughed at or for being unscientific. It was that they felt they'd be drawing onto themselves some unimaginable horror by admitting it. It was more convenient to indulge in the specific explanation, no matter how unconvincing it was. A chill ran up Asakawa's spine and Yoshino's simultaneously. Unsurprisingly, they were both thinking the same thing. The silence only confirmed the premonition which was welling up in each man's breast. It's not over. It's only just started. No matter how much scientific knowledge they filled themselves with, on a very basic level, people believe in the existence of something that the laws of science can't explain. When they were discovered, where were their hands? Asakawa suddenly asked. On their heads, or well, it was more like they were covering their faces with their hands. Were they by any chance pulling at their hair, like this? Asakawa tugged at his own hair to demonstrate. Eh? In other words, were they tearing at their heads or pulling out their hair or anything like that? No, I don't think so. I see. Could I get their names and addresses, Yoshino? Sure, but don't forget your promise. Asakawa smiled and nodded. Yoshino got up. As he stood, the table swayed and their coffee spilled into their saucers. Yoshino hadn't even touched his. I should have made a pin message. 5. That's what I'm doing right now, funny enough. Okay. Asakawa kept investigating the four victims' backgrounds whenever he had free time, whenever he had a free minute. But had so much work to do that he wasn't getting as far as he'd hoped. Before he knew it, a week had passed and it was a new month. And both August's rain-soaked humidity and September's summery heat became distant memories, pushed aside by the sign of deepening autumn. Nothing happened for a while. Ever since then, he'd make a point of reading every inch of the local news pages, but without coming across anything remotely similar. Or it was just that something horrible was advancing slowly but surely, where Asakawa couldn't see. But the more time elapsed, the more inclined he was to think that the 4 deaths were just coincidences, unconnected in any ways. He hadn't seen Yoshino since then either. He had probably forgotten the whole thing too. If he hadn't, he would have contacted Asakawa by now. Whenever his passion for the case showed signs of waning, Asakawa could take 4 cards out of his pocket and be reminded once again that it couldn't have been a coincidence. On the cards he'd written the deceased names, addresses, and other pertinent information, and on the remaining space he planned to record their activities during the month of August and September, their upbringing, and anything else he researched turned up. Card 1. Tomoko Oishi. Date of birth 10/21/72. Keisei School for Girls. Senior, age 17. Address 17 Motomachi, Honmoku, Naka Ward, Yokohama. Approximately 11 p.m. September 5th. Dies in kitchen on first floor of home. Parents away. Cause of death, sudden heart failure. Card 2. Shuichi Iwata. Date of birth 5/26/71. Asian Preparatory Academy. First year, age 19.
What? Did we just become best friends? Yup.
Thank you. Address 1523 Nishi Nakanobu Shinagawa Ward, Tokyo. 10:54 p.m. September 5th. Falls over and dies at the intersection in front of the Shinagawa station. Cause of death, cardiac infraction. You're fine. It just caught me by surprise. Card 3. Haruko Tsuji. Date of birth 1/12/73. Keisei School for Girls. Senior, age 17. Address 519 Mori, Isogo Ward, Yokohama. Late night, September 5th, or early next morning, dies in a car off Prefect Road at foot of Mount Okusu. Cause of death, sudden heart failure. Card 4. Takehiko Nomi. Date of birth, 12/4/70. Asian Preparatory Academy, 2nd year. Age 19. Address 1104 Uehara, Shibuya Ward, Tokyo. I think maybe once I get to honestly, I'll probably get. There's like one more. I think there's like one more chapter, like one or two more chapters left of like part 1 in the beginning. So I'll probably get through that tonight. Okay, late night, September 5th, or early next morning, dies with Haruko Tsuji in car at foot of Mount Okusu. Cause of death, sudden heart failure. Tomoko Oishi and Hanako Tsuji went to the same high school and were friends. Shuichi Iwata and Takehiko Nomi studied at the same prep school and were friends. This much had been clear prior to legwork, which indeed confirmed it. And from the simple fact that Tsuji and Nomi had gone for a drive together on Mount Okusu in Yokosuka at the night of September 5th, it was obvious that they were, if not quite lovers. At least fooling around. Hello, welcome in.
Hello there.
Well, Anyways, hello, thank you for coming in for the first time. I am Viliana, your resident villainess, and I am starting my little reading corner thing just to get through my backlog of books. And I am currently reading The Ring. Yes, reading. And I've wanted to do this. Well, I'm glad to have you here. I think. Hold on. Wait a minute. I think. There it is. So that's what that one was for. Okay. The World Rally Championship. That took me out when I saw that. That was so funny when I saw that. Well, so answer your question, Reina. I mainly like to read horror and murder mystery, and that's what most of my books consist of. I'm into games too. I'm a variety streamer, so it's basically almost anything. But I made me a comfy streamer. I do enjoy horrors. I do enjoy horror books, but watching horror, not for me. A few of them? Oh, the books. Well, I'm going through the Ring series. So I'm going through the Ring series, and there's the Ring, the next one is Spiral, and then the last one is Loop. So those are so I'm gonna probably finish like the series. I don't much as I would like to like go jump around, but I prefer to. But I wanna finish the series before going to a new book. Unless it's a standalone book. Okay. Where am I? Okay, here we are. Okay, here we go. Okay, so when he asked her friends, he'd heard the rumors that Suji had been dating a prep school guy from Tokyo. However, Asakawa still didn't know when or how they met. Naturally, he suspected Oishi and Iwata were going out, too, but he couldn't find anything to back this up. It was quite possible that Oishi and Iwata had never even seen each other, in which case, what was there to link these four? They seemed far too closely related to this unknown being, for this unknown being to have picked them totally at random. Maybe there was some secret that only the four of them knew, and they'd been killed for it. Asakawa tried out a more scientific explanation with himself. Perhaps the four of them had been in the same place at the same time, and all four had been infected with a virus that attacked the heart. Hey now. Asakawa shook his head as he walked. A virus that can suddenly cause heart failure? Come on. He climbed the stairs, muttering to himself, a virus. A virus. Indeed, he should start out with attempts of scientific explanation. Well, suppose there was a virus that caused heart attacks. At least it was a little more realistic than imagining that something supernatural was behind it all. It seemed less likely to get him laughed at. Even if such a virus hadn't yet been discovered on Earth, maybe it had just recently fallen to Earth inside a meteor. Or maybe it had developed as a biological weapon and had somehow escaped. You couldn't rule out the possibility. Sure. He tried thinking of it as a kind of virus for a while. Not that Not that this would satisfy all his doubts. Why had they all died with a look of astonishment on their faces? Why had Suji and Nomi died on opposite sides of the small car, as if they were trying to get away from each other? Why hadn't the autopsies revealed anything? The possibility of an escaped germ weapon could at least answer the third question. There would have been a gag order. If he were to pursue his hypothesis further, he would deduce that the fact that there hadn't been any other victims yet meant that the virus was not airborne. It was either bloodborne, like AIDS, or was fairly contagious. But more importantly, where had these four picked it up? He'd have to go back and sift through their activities in August and September again and look for places and times they had in common. Since the participants' mouths had been shut permanently, it wouldn't be easy. If their meeting had been a secret among the four of them, something neither parents nor friends knew about, then how was he to ferret it out? But he was sure that these four kids had some time, some place, something in common. Sitting down at his word processor, Asakawa chased the unknown virus from his thoughts. He needed to get out the notes he had just taken, to sum up the contents of the cassette he'd made. He had to get this article finished today. Tomorrow, Sunday, he and his wife Shizu were going to visit her sister, Yoshimi Oishi. He wanted to see with his own eyes the spot where Tomoko had died, to feel in his own flesh whatever air still lingered. His wife had agreed to go to Honmoku to console her bereaved older sister. She had no inkling of her husband's true motives. Asakawa started pounding the keys of the word processor before he'd come up with a decent outline. Chapter 6. I have one chapter left. I don't work tomorrow, so I could get through this one chapter. It's like it's like the last chapter. It's the last chapter. perhaps. Yeah, this is like the last chapter. Yeah, this is.
Why is the rum always gone?
This is, well, my model is there's already a pre-made model, so. Customized? All right. Okay, 1 second. 1 second. Maybe, perhaps this one.
Skip the.
Damn it, ads. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay. The one video was about to end, so I just decided to get a new one, to find a new video. Ooh, okay, hold on a minute. Okay, I don't like that. Maybe? Okay. Let me just get a sip. Okay, so chapter 6. I actually like this playlist. I actually like this one a bit more. Alright. Is it too loud? It seems a bit too loud. Yeah, last one. Okay. Okay, it's fine? Okay, cool. So I won't mess with that anymore. Okay. Shizu was seeing her parents for the first time in a month. Ever since their granddaughter Tomoko had died, they came to Tokyo from their home in Ashikaga whenever they could, not only to console their daughter, but to console in return. Shizu only understood this today. Her heartache when she saw her aged parents' thin, grief-stricken faces. They had once had 3 grandchildren. Their oldest daughter, Yoshimi's daughter, Tomoko. Their second daughter, Kazuko's son, Kenichi. And Shizu's daughter, Yoko. One grandchild from each of their 3 daughters, not all that common. Tomoko had been their first grandchild, and their faces had crinkled up every time they had seen her. They had enjoyed spoiling her. Amen into arts. Yes, I am. Now they were so depressed that this was impossible to say whose grief was deeper, the parents or the grandparents. No, you're fine. You're fine. No, you're fine. Don't worry. No, I'm not an artist. Okay. Hey.
Oh, that's nice.
Alright. I guess grandchildren really mean a lot. Shizu had just turned 30 this year. It was all she could do to imagine what her sister must be feeling, putting herself in her sister's place, imagining how she'd feel if she lost her child. But really, there was no comparison to be made between her daughter Yoko, only a year and a half old, and Tomoko, who had died at 17. She couldn't fathom how every passing year could deepen her love for her child. Sometime after 3 in the afternoon, her parents began to get ready to go home to Ashikaga. Shizu could hardly contain her surprise. Why had her husband, who always protested that he was too busy, suggested this visit to her sister's house? This was the same husband who'd skipped the poor girl's funeral, pleading that he had a deadline to meet. And now here it was almost dinner time, and he wasn't showing the slightest inclination of leaving. He'd only met Tomoko a few times, and had probably never talked with her for very long. Surely he wasn't feeling detained by memories of the deceased. Oh, hold on 1 second.
I'm back. um, so the origin of that scream. The story behind that stream is from my friend Nak. I was with him doing a stream with my friend Mira. And that's the scream that happened in in that stream. And he hasn't been able to recreate it since, which is the funny thing.
Why is the rum always gone?
God, I have trauma with that sound. I mean, I don't mind. Okay. This is so ASMR. I've been wanting to do ASMR, so I'm still working on that. Alright. Yeah. Get through this last chapter. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Found my place. I fall. I'm good. I'm good. On the last chapter. But the last chapter of the first part. And I'm probably gonna end it for the night. Most likely I'm gonna end it. Because the past 2 nights I've been trying to do this. But it's been like storming the past 2 days. Yeah, that's basically it. The Canadian electrical grid. I mean, you could, well, I have a Twitter, so. All right. Yeah, let's get through this. Yeah, let's get through this this last chapter. Okay. Okay. Shizu tapped Asakawa lightly on the knee and whispered in his ear, "Dear, it's probably about time. Look at Yoko. She's sleepy. Maybe we ought to see if we could let her take a nap here." They had brought their daughter. Normally, this was nap time. Sure enough, Yoko had started blinking like she did when she was sleepy. But if they let her sleep here, they'd have to stay in this house for at least 2 more hours. What would they find to talk about with her grieving sister and her husband for 2 more hours? "She can sleep on the train, don't you think?" said Shizu, dropping her voice. "Last time we tried that, she got fussy and it was awful all the way home." No thanks. Valid. Whenever Yoko got sleepy in a crowd, she got unbelievably fussy. She'd flail her little arms and legs, wail at the top of her lungs, and just generally make life difficult for her parents. Scolding her only made it worse. There was no way to calm her down except to try to get her to sleep. At times like that, Asakawa became intensely conscious of the looks people around him, and he'd start sulking himself, as though he were the prime victim of his daughter's shrieking. The accusing stares of the other passengers always made him feel like he was choking. Shizu preferred not to see her husband in that state, with his cheeks twitching nervously and all. "All right, then, if you say so, great. Great, let's see if she'll take a nap upstairs." Yoko lay in her mother's lap, eyes half closed. "I'll put her down," he said, caressing his daughter's cheek with the back of his hand. The words sounded strange coming from Asakawa, who hardly ever helped with the baby. Maybe he'd had a change of heart, and now that he'd witnessed the sorrow of parents who'd lost a child. Thank you, Fall. Best mod.
Okay, what's come over you today?
It's spooky.
Don't worry, she'll go right down. Leave it to me. Shizu handed the child over. Thanks. I just wish she were like this all the time. As she was transferred from her mother's bosom to her father's, Yoko began to scrunch up her face. But before she had time to follow through, she had fallen asleep. Asakawa climbed the stairs, cradling his daughter. The second floor consisted of 2 Japanese-style rooms and the Western-style room, which had been Tomoko's. He laid Yoko on the futon in the Japanese-style room that faced south. He didn't even need to stay with her as she fell asleep. She was already out, her breathing regular. Asakawa slipped out of the room and listened to see what was going on downstairs and then entered Tomoko's bedroom. He felt a little guilty about invading a dead girl's privacy.
Yeah, fair enough.
Wasn't this the kind of thing he abhorred? But it was for a good cause, defeating evil. There was nothing but to do it. But even as he thought this, he hated the way he was always willing to seize on any reason, no matter how suspicious, in order to rationalize his actions. But he protested. It wasn't like he was writing an article about it. He was just trying to figure out when and where the 4 had been together. Sorry. He opened her desk drawers. Just the normal assortment of stationery supplies, like any high school girl would have, rather neatly arranged. 3 snapshots, a junk box, letters, a notepad, a sewing kit. Had her parents gone through here after she had died? It didn't look like it. Probably she was just naturally neat. He was hoping to find a diary. It would save him a lot of time. Today I got together with Haruko Tsuji, Takehiko Nomi, and Shuichi Wada, and if you could just find an entry like that. He took a notebook from her bookshelf and flipped through it. He actually came across a very girlish diary in the back of a drawer. But there were only a few desultory entries on the first few pages, all of them dated long ago. On the shelf beside the desk there were no books, only a red-flowered makeup stand. He opened the drawer, a bunch of cheap accessories, a lot of mismatched earrings. It seemed she had a habit of losing one of every pair she owned. A pocket comb with several slender black strands of hair so wrapped around it. Opening the built-in wardrobe, his nose was assailed by the scent of high school girls. It was packed tight with colorful dresses and skirts on hangers. His sister-in-law and her husband had obviously not figured out what to do with these clothes, which still carried their daughter's fragrance. Asakawa pricked up his ears at what was going on downstairs. He wasn't sure what they'd think if they caught him in here. There was no sound. His wife and her sister must still be talking about something. Asakawa searched the pockets of the clothes in the wardrobe, one by one. Handkerchiefs, movie ticket stubs, gum wrappers, napkins, commuter pass case. He examined it, a pass for the stretch between Yamate and Tsurumi, and a student ID card and a card. I lost my place for a second. blah, blah. Okay. There was a name written on the card. Something or other Nonoyama. He wasn't sure how to pronounce the characters for the first name. Yuki, maybe? For the characters alone, he couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. Why did she have someone else's card in her pass case? He heard footsteps coming up the stairs. He slipped the card into his pocket, put the case back where he found it, and shut the wardrobe. He stepped into the hall just as his sister-in-law reached the top. Sorry, is there a bathroom up here? He made a show of acting antsy. It's there at the end of the hall. She didn't seem to suspect anything. Is Yoko sleeping like a good girl? Yes, thanks. Sorry to put you to such trouble. Oh no, not at all. The sister-in-law bowed slightly, then stepped into the Japanese-style room, handed her kimono sash. In the bathroom, Asakawa took out the card. Pacific Resorts Club Members Card. It read. Underneath this was Nonoyama's name and membership number and expiration date. He flipped it over. 5 membership conditions in fine print, plus the name of the company and its address. Pacific Resorts Club, Incorporated, 3 to 5, Kojimachi, Chiyoda Ward, Tokyo. Phone number 03-261-4922. If it wasn't something she'd found or swiped, Tomoko must have borrowed this card from this Nonoyama person. Why? To use specific resort facilities, of course. Which one and when? He couldn't call from the house. Saying he was going to go buy cigarettes, he ran to a payphone. He dialed the number. Hello, Specific Resorts. May I help you? A young woman's voice. I'd like to know the facilities I can use with the membership card. The voice didn't respond right away. Maybe they'd had so many facilities available that she couldn't just list them all. That is, for example, like an overnight trip from Tokyo, he added. It would have been stood out if the 4 of them had gone away for like 2 or 3 nights together. The fact that he hadn't turned anything up so far meant that they had probably gone for no longer than a single night. She could easily get away for a single night by lying to her parents she was staying at a friend's house. We have a full range of facilities at our Pacific land in South Hakone, she said in a business-like manner. Specifically, what sort of leisure activities do you have there? Certainly, sir. We have provisions for golf, tennis, and field sports, as well as a swimming pool. And you have lodgings there? Yes, sir. In addition to a hotel, Pacific Land features the Villa Log Cabin community of rental cottages. Shall I send you our brochure? Yes, please. He pretended to be a prospective customer, hoping it would make it easier to extract information from her. The hotel and the cabins, are they open to the general public? Certainly, at non-member rates. I see. Can you give me the phone number? Maybe I'll go have a look. I can take care of reservations right now if you wish. Yeah, we're almost done. A few more pages. No, I may be going for a drive down there sometime and just decide to have a look. So could I have the phone number? 1 moment, please. As he waited, Asakawa took out a memo pad and pen. Are you ready? The woman returned and dictated 2 11-digit phone numbers. The area codes were long. They were way out in the sticks. Asakawa scribbled them down. Just for future reference, where are your other facilities located? We have the same sort of full-service resorts at Lake Hamana and at Hamajima in Mie Prefecture. Much too far. Students wouldn't have that kind of war chest. I see. Sounds like they're all in the Pacific, just like the name says. Then the woman began to detail all the fabulous advantages of becoming a Pacific Resorts member. Asakawa listened politely for a while before cutting her off. Great. The rest I'm sure I can find out from the pamphlet. I'll give you my address so you can send it. He told her his address and hung up. Listening to her sales pitch, he'd begun to think it actually wouldn't be a bad idea to join if he could afford it. It had been over an hour since Yoko had gone to sleep, and Shizu's parents had already returned to Ashikaga. Shizu herself was in the kitchen doing the dishes for her sister, who was still prone to break down at the slightest provocation. Asakawa briskly helped carry dishes in from the living room. "What's gotten into you today? You're acting weird," said Shizu without interrupting her dishwashing. "You put Yoko down and you're helping in the kitchen. Are you turning over a new leaf? If so, I hope it sticks."
He kind of sucks.
Asakawa was lost in thought and didn't want to be bothered. He wished his wife would act like her name, which meant quiet.
Yeah, you remember why I didn't like this dude. Is he still alright after that statement? Is he? The man wishes his wife acted like her name. Quiet.
By the way, did you put a disposable on her before bed? We wouldn't want her to leak at someone else's house. Asakawa showed no interest, but just looked around at the kitchen walls. Tomoko had died here. There had been shards of glass and the pool of coke next to her when she was found. She must have been attacked by the virus right when she was going to have a drink of coke from the fridge. Asakawa opened the refrigerator, mimicking Tomoko's movements. He imagined holding a glass and pretending to drink. "What in the world are you doing?" Shizu was staring at him, mouth wide open. Asakawa kept going, still pretending to drink. He looked behind him. When he turned around, there was a glass door right in front of him. Separating the living room from the kitchen, it reflected the fluorescent light above the sink. Maybe because it's still bright outside and the living room was filled with light, it only reflected the fluorescent light and not the expression of the people on this side. If the other side of the glass was dark and this side light, like it would have been the night when Tomoko was standing here, the glass door would have been a mirror reflecting the scene in the kitchen. It would have reflected Tomoko's face, contorted with terror. Asakawa could also start to think that the pane of glass as a witness of everything that had happened. Glass could be transparent or reflective, depending on the interplay of light and darkness. Asakawa was bringing his face nearer the glass, as if drawn there, when his wife tapped him on the back. Just at the moment, they heard Yoko cry. They heard Yoko crying upstairs. She was awake. Yoko's up. Shizu wiped her wet hands on a towel. Their daughter usually didn't cry so hard upon waking up. Shizu rushed up to the second floor. As she was going out, Yoshimi came in. Asakawa handed her the card he'd found. This had fallen under the piano. He spoke casually and waited for a reaction. Yoshimi took the card and turned it over. "This is strange. What was this doing here?" She cocked her head, puzzled. "Could Tomoko have borrowed it from her friend, do you suppose? But I've never heard of this person. I don't think she had a friend by that name." Yoshimi looked at Asakawa with exaggerated worry. "Darn it, this looks important. I swear, that girl." Her voice choked up. Even the slightest thing could set the wheels of grief in motion for her. Asakawa hesitated to ask, but did Tomoko and her friends by any chance go to this resort during summer vacation? Yoshimi shook her head. She trusted her daughter. Tomoko hadn't been the kind of child to lie about staying over at her friends'. Plus, she'd been studying for exams. Asakawa could understand how Yoshimi felt. He decided not to ask about Tomoko any further. No high school student with exams looming in front of her was going to tell her parents that she was renting a cottage with her boyfriend. She would have lied and said she was studying at a friend's house. Her parents would never know. "I'll find the owner and return it." Yoshimi bowed her head in silence, and then her husband called from the living room, and she hurried out of the kitchen. The bereaved father was seated in front of the newly installed Buddhist altar, speaking to his daughter's photograph. His voice was shockingly cheerful, and Asakawa became depressed. He was obviously living in denial. Asakawa could only pray that he'd be able to get through. Asakawa had found out one thing. If this Nonoyama had in fact lent Tomoko the membership card, he or she would have contacted Tomoko's parents to ask her for the card back, learning of their death. But Tomoko's mother knew nothing about the card. Nonoyama couldn't have forgotten about the card, even if the card were part of the family membership deal. Dues were expensive enough that Nonoyama wouldn't just allow the card to stay lost. So what did this mean? This was how Asakawa figured it. Nonoyama had lent the card to one of the other three, either Iwata, Tsuji, or Nomi. Somehow it passed into Tomoko's possession, and that's how things had ended. Nonoyama would have contacted the parents of the person he or she had lent it to. The parents would have searched their child's belongings. They wouldn't have found the card. The card was here. If Asakawa contacted the families of the other three victims, he might be able to unearth Nonoyama's address. He should call right away tonight. If he couldn't dig up a clue this way, then it would have unlikely that the card would probably provide a means of finding when and where the four had been together. At any rate, he wanted to meet Nonoyama and hear what he or she had to say. If he had to, he could always find some way to track down Nonoyama's address based on the membership number. Asking Pacific Resource directly probably wouldn't get him anywhere, but he was sure that his newspaper connections could come up with something. Someone was calling him, a distant voice. Dear? Dear? His wife's flustered voice mingled with the baby's crying. Dear, could you come here for a minute? Asakawa came to himself again. Suddenly he wasn't even sure what he'd been thinking about at the time. There was something strange about the way his daughter was crying. The feeling became stronger as he mounted the stairs. Asakawa snapped out of the reverie, forgetting all about what he had been thinking. He suddenly realized there was something unusual about the sound of his daughter's crying. He raced up the stairs, fearing that something was wrong. What's wrong? He asked his wife accusingly. Something's not right with Yoko. I think something's happened to her. The way she's crying. It's different from how it usually sounds. Do you think she's sick? Asakawa placed his hand on Yoko's forehead. She didn't have a fever, but her literal hands were trembling. The trembling spread to her whole body, and sometimes her back shook. Her face was beet red, her eyes clenched shut. How long has she been like this? It's 'cause she woke up and there was no one here with her. The baby often cried if her mother wasn't there when she woke up, but she always calmed down when her mother ran to her and held her. When a baby cried, it was trying to ask for something, but what? The baby was trying to tell them something. She wasn't just being bratty. Her two tiny hands were clasping tightly over her face. Cowering. That was it. The child was wailing out of fear. Yoko turned her face away and then opened her fist slightly. She seemed to be trying to point forward. Asakawa looked in that direction. There was a pillar. He raised his eyes. Hanging about 30 centimeters from the ceiling was a fist-sized mask of a Hanya. Oh, like Hanyu. Hanya. Oh, okay. Duh. A female demon. Was the child afraid of the mask? Hey, look, said Asakawa, pointing with his chin. They looked at the mask simultaneously, then slowly turned their gazes to each other. No way. She's frightened of a demon? Asakawa got to his feet. He took down the demon mask from where it hung on the beam and laid it face down on top of the dresser. Yoko couldn't see it there. She abruptly stopped crying. What's the matter, Yoko? Did the nasty demon scare you? Shizu seemed relieved now that she understood, and she happily rubbed her cheek against the child's. Asakawa wasn't so easily satisfied. For some reason, he didn't want to be in this room any longer. Hey, let's go home, he urged his wife. That evening, as soon as he got home from the Oishis, He called the Sujis, the Nomis, and Iwatas in that order. He asked each family whether they had been contacted by one of the child's acquaintances regarding a membership card for a resort club. The last person he spoke to, Iwata's mother, gave him a long, rambling answer. There was a call from someone who said he'd gone to the same high school as my son, an older boy saying he lent my son his resort membership card, and could he get it back. But I searched every corner of my son's room and never could find it. I've been worried about it ever since. He quickly asked for Nonoyama's phone number and immediately called it. Nonoyama had run into Iwata in Shibuya on the last Sunday in August and lent him his card. Just as Asakawa had suspected, Iwata had told him he was going away with his high school girl he'd been hitting on. Summer vacation's almost over, you know. I want to really live it up once before it's over, or else I won't be able to buckle down and study for the exams. Bro. Okay. Nonoyama had laughed when he heard this. You idiot. Prep school students aren't supposed to have summer vacations. The last Sunday in August had been the 26th. If they'd gone anywhere for the night, it would have been the 27th, 28th, 29th, or 30th. Asakawa didn't know about the college prep school, but for the high school girls at least, fall semester began on the 1st of September. Maybe it was because she was tired from being so long in unfamiliar surroundings. Yoko soon fell asleep right next to her mother. When he put his ear to the bedroom door, he could hear both of them breathing regularly, fast asleep. 9 in the evening. This was Asakawa's time to relax. Until his wife and child were asleep, there was no room in this tiny condo for him to settle down for work. Asakawa got a beer from the fridge and poured it into a glass. It tasted special tonight. He made definite progress finding that membership card. That was a good chance at some time between the 27th and the 30th of August. Shuichi Iwata and the other 3 had stayed at the facilities belonging to Pacific Resorts. The most likely place was Villa Log Cabin at Pacific Land in South Hakone. South Hakone was the only Pacific Resorts properly close enough to be a viable candidate, and he couldn't imagine a group of poor students going out all out and staying at a hotel. They would probably have used a membership to rent one of the cottages on the cheap. They were only 5,000 yen a night for members, which came to a little over 1,000 apiece. He had the phone number for Villa Log Cabin at hand. He put his memos on the table. The quickest thing would be to simply call the front desk and ask if a party of 4 had stayed there under the name Nonoyama. But they never tell him over the phone. Naturally, anybody who had risen within the firm of the position of rental cottage manager would have been well trained to consider it his duty to protect guests' privacy. Even if he revealed his position as a reporter for a major newspaper and clearly stated his reason for inquiring, the manager would never tell him over the phone. Asakawa considered contacting the local bureau and getting them to use a lawyer with whom they had connections to ask for a look at the guest register. The only people a manager was legally bound to show the register to were the police and attorneys. Asakawa could try to pose as one or the other, but he'd probably be spotted immediately, and that would mean trouble for the newspaper. It was safer and more effective to go through channels.
Yeah. Because impersonating an officer is bad.
But that would take at least 3 or 4 days, and he hated to wait that long. He wanted to know now. His passion for the case was such that he couldn't bear to wait 3 days. What in the world was going to come of this? If indeed the 4 of them had stayed the night at Villa Log Cabin at Pacific Land in South Hakone at the end of August, and if indeed the clue allowed him to unravel the riddles of their death, well, what could it have been anyways? Virus. He was all too aware that the only reason he was calling it a virus was to keep himself from being overawed by the thought of some mysterious thing being behind it all. It made sense, to a degree, to marshal the power of science in facing down supernatural power. He wasn't going to get anywhere fighting a thing. He didn't understand what words he didn't understand. He had to translate the thing he didn't understand into words he did. Asakawa recalled Yoko's cries. Why was she so frightened when she saw the demon mask this afternoon? On the way home on the train, he'd asked his wife, "Hey, have you been teaching Yoko about demons?" "What?" "You know, with picture books or something like that. Have you been teaching her to be afraid of demons?" "No way. Why would I?" The conversation ended there. Shizu was unconcerned, but Asakawa worried. That kind of fear only existed on a deep spiritual level. It was different from fearing something because he had been taught to fear it. Ever since he'd come down out of the trees, men have lived in fear of something or other. Thunder, typhoons, wild beasts, volcanic eruptions, the dark. The first time a child experiences thunder and lightning, he or she feels an instinctive fear. That was understandable. To begin with, thunder was real. It really existed. But what about demons? The dictionary would tell you that demons were imaginary monsters, or the spirits of dead people. If Yoko was going to be afraid of the demon because it looked scary, then she should also have been afraid of models of Godzilla. My goat. Our Lord and Savior Godzilla. After all, they were made to look fearsome, too. She'd seen one once in a department store show window, a cunningly made Godzilla replica. Far from being frightened, she just stared at it intently, eyes glowing with curiosity. How did you explain that? The only thing he knew for sure was that Godzilla, no matter how you looked at it, was an imaginary monster. So what about demons? And are demons unique to Japan? No. Other cultures have the same type of thing. Devils. The second beer wasn't tasting as good as the first one. Is there anything else Yoko's afraid of? That's right, there is. Darkness. She's terribly afraid of the dark. She absolutely never goes into an unlit room alone. Yoko. Sunchild. But darkness, too, really existed, as light's opposite pole. Even now, Yoko was asleep in her mother's embrace in a dark room.
And that is the conclusion of part 1.
Okay. 3.
Oh shit, it's gonna be 2:30. Oh no, honestly, I know I'm gonna be on tomorrow, for sure. Oh god, it's gonna be 2:30. Oh my god. Yeah, a little. Even though I took a nap earlier, it wasn't a long nap like I wanted. Yeah, I'm probably gonna. I'm gonna go to sleep. Oh gosh. I love taking naps, but the only problem is I can't sleep at night when I'm supposed to, so that's why I try to stay up throughout the day. Especially if I work the next day. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna end it here for the night. Whew. Yeah, I'm getting tired. Oh, yeah, going on 3 hours. Ooh. Hey yo, don't say my other name. Yeah, who is that? Exactly. Who was that? I don't know who that. I don't know who she is. All right. Well, thank you for being with me tonight, and I'm kind of glad. Yeah, exactly. No secrets. I don't know. But yeah, I will until I'm done with all my books. Is how long this little segment's gonna go. Thank you. Also, you have a good night too. All right. So, thank you for being with me again. So, good night, good morning, or good afternoon, or whenever you're watching this VOD. I will see you later. Bye.